pressure coming through today, sharp movements to the downside. It wasn't as bad as it is now this morning, so clearly a lot of deterioration happening in midday trade today.
Yeah, so I think the dip in commodity prices has pushed the general miners down, so we see big movements in Billiton and Anglo on the downside, and that's pushing the whole market down. As you said earlier, the resource 20 under a lot of pressure. We see copper down 3% yesterday, and it was down again. So those growth concerns of China, you see that commodity prices dip very aggressively, and obviously the Eurozone having to pay back 422 billion euros is also putting pressure on the sovereign debt issue. So people are taking money out of the markets and waiting to see if there's going to be a liquidity squeeze.
Well, Rob, you mentioned China, and there's still talk about China softening its growth. Do you think it's an actual real concern at this point in time? Because we keep hearing that there's a lot of fundamental underlying strong demand that is pushing the Chinese economy, that even if they do try soften growth, the demand is there. So we shouldn't be worried about whether China is going to be growing at 8% or 10%.
Well, obviously they have tried to slow down their growth. They've increased the amount that banks have to hold in reserve. They've changed interest rates, etc. And they have been trying to slow down their economy, and it hasn't worked initially in the beginning half of the year. But slowly these effects are taking place, and it is slightly slowing down. We don't want it to slow below 8%, but I think anywhere from 8% and higher will still be good for the world economy, and will still lead to growth going forward. So I think they're in a very strong position. They allow commodity prices to come down like they are now, and then they'll go in and buy again. If that buying doesn't come through from China, that's where we have to start worrying. At the moment I wouldn't worry too much, but you have to keep an eye and make sure that economy is still growing above 8%.
Rob, you mentioned a possible liquidity squeeze coming through. Do you think it's going to be a reality going forward in the likes of the Eurozone? Do you think that the ECB will not step in and try and increase the stimulus in that country, even though we are seeing a lot of austerity measures?
I think they're going to have to keep the liquidity going. A very problematic liquidity squeeze will cause a very big problem in the Eurozone, and we don't want to see a collapse like we saw a liquidity problem when Lehman Brothers went down. I think that they're going to have to extend stimulus packages, and I think if we saw Geithner said that the Eurozone must extend the amount of stimulus that they're giving and for a longer period of time. So the European Central Bank needs to look very closely at withdrawing stimulus, and I think they will have to eventually add that a stimulus package in. We can't have another liquidity problem on the sovereign debt issue side.
Rob, we have a heightened sense of uncertainty at this point in time, and it's really being reflected in the JSE All Share as well. And in fact, we are starting to see us trading in very tight trading ranges. Tell us about the support levels that we've been seeing in South Africa and also in the US.
Well, if we take firstly a look at the FTSE, they're at a 5-month support level and slowly breaking down, and they're going to retest this 5-month support level. It'll be about the third time they're testing this level. We have to see if the FTSE hold. The US also on the S&P 500, 1050 is a support level that we're going to be looking at. We're at about 1070 now. So we're starting to get back to the lower end of this trading range that we've had. People are getting a little bit worried. They've held for 3 or 4 times in a row, and will they hold this time round? I think that the European central debt issue is going to be a big problem, and we see if that's going to be able to stabilize. If it doesn't, and there's still if there's still problems there and liquidity problems, we could see all of these support lines across the board, emerging markets as well as our level on the Aussie, which is about 23,500 breakdown. So very critical levels here. This is when people get very scared and the volatility lifts up. Often gives you an opportunity to enter the market as well if you've been waiting on the sidelines.
Rob, we had full year earnings out from Naspers today showing headline earnings up 22%, a company that has done quite well despite the fact that we have seen a slowdown in South Africa. Tell us about your target price for Naspers, because currently we're seeing it at around 260 Rand.
The analysts will have to take a look at the numbers properly with these new numbers and go through them with a fine comb, but currently we still got targets that are above 300 Rand and well excess of 300 Rand. The company looking very solid still. I think they've pulled back about 13% since the beginning of the year and showing good value at these levels. They're resilient. You can see from the numbers already that print ad spend is the only really problematic section, but that's worldwide and it's not just specific to Naspers. But on the internet side and the emerging market, they've got very good growth. Tencent increased their earnings by 76% for Naspers, and I think they're looking very strong. At these depressed levels, if you haven't got into Naspers, you'll probably start to look to nibble a little bit. Obviously, as we said earlier, the support levels that are sitting on the FTSE, S&P and our market as well, you have to watch very closely, and our breakdown there would then tell you to pull out. But I think they're looking very positive and very resilient in these difficult times.
Okay, Rob, lastly, just looking at the likes of MTN, a company that came under significant pressure yesterday, down 3%, and also denying the fact that there was a lot of speculation that they would be interested in another Indian telecoms company, Loop Telecom. What is your view? Because we keep hearing talk and speculation about MTN looking at some kind of acquisition, whether it be here in Africa or in India.
They definitely need an acquisition to get increased growth and increase their market share. So I think they will be looking always. I think they've had so much corporate action that hasn't gone their way. They've had regulatory issues, and I think that they will deny anything now as long as they can until they get some clarity on what they're doing. I think that especially when you deal in the Indian market, there's a lot of talk and a lot of leaked reports, etc. So I think they will deny as long as they can, and they don't want to go into another bidding war, etc. With an Indian company. So I think they will deny it as long as they can, but they definitely are looking for acquisitions to increase their growth.
Rob, thank